Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Ipswich Conservation Commission, I want to thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking today about Phragmites, dealing with Phragmites, and we have some experts here. My name is Catherine Carney-Feldman, and it's my joy to be able to welcome you all to this. And specifically, I'm going to have Rick Hydron coming up. He's going to be talking to you. He's one of the producers of the film that you're about to see. There'll be a chance to ask questions, and he'll also be introducing to people that are in the audience who are also involved in making these films as well. So, Rick, you want to come up?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. I really appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and join us. Come on and sit down. There's plenty of seats here, and there's a flyer on the corner there. You can have one. I think what we'll do is have a few thank yous to some of the people who helped us get this to where we are today, and then get right into a 22-minute video which gives you an overview of the project. The project is really in two different parts. First part that we're going to see today is a sampler. It's a little bit between 2.5 minutes of each of 11 segments. Most of us are used to documentaries, which are, like Ken Burns, will go on for night after night after night after night. Wonderful things like baseball and the Civil War and whatnot. We live in a different world. With YouTube and the internet, at night, 90% of the activity on the internet is people downloading from YouTube and Flickr and these other entertainment sources. People like getting stuff in small segments. So the concept here was to create a series of very short videos that could live on YouTube and be free to everybody to watch. Put them into a website so people can go there and see more about it, see pictures, read the transcripts, etc., and hopefully gain some knowledge about Phragmites and the Great Marsh. The idea was pretty simple. We would go on to Kickstarter and ask for money for something that nobody knew anything about. That makes sense, right? Fortunately, there were enough people who did know something about Phragmites, and we were very successful. And I have to say that we went over the top the night an article came out in the Boston Globe. That was the big, shot in the arm that we made it all happen. It was a modest amount of money, but it helped us get started. The people that I want to thank is Carl first. Everybody here hopefully knows Carl. About 2 years ago, encouraged me to pursue this idea of creating videos about the Great Marsh because nobody else was. And Peter Phippen, who's be here to answer questions for you afterwards. Jeff Walker, who's also here and who can also answer lots of questions for you afterwards. Dr. Greg Moore, whom I had hoped would be here tonight. And Josh, really, who has had a path that collided across ours on a little project which was a subset to this, which is getting it known. How do we get people to know this? The trouble with having the world getting flat is everybody's a publisher, but no one knows how to find anything. So the concept was to put QR-coded signs up around the marsh so people could take their cell phones and their iPads, whatever they have with them, click on it, boom, up comes a video about what they're seeing right there, which for the most part was going to be about Phragmites. I have some cards here, and I'd like all of you to take one with you. It'll actually work and take you to the video that we're about to see. Sharon, if you could advance to the next one. These are some of the people you will see in the videos, in addition to Peter and those that we just mentioned. And if Sharon could go to the next one, I think it will be blank, which means it's time to run the video. So Sharon switches that over while I sit here and do shadows. There we go. Hit it, Sharon.
Hi, I'm State Senator Bruce Tarr. I'm the minority leader of the Massachusetts State Senate, and my hometown is Gloucester. I have the honor of representing 17 communities in the northeastern part of Massachusetts. I'm also honored to be the co-chair of the Great Marsh Revitalization Task Force, a truly grassroots organization that's comprised of all of the stakeholders in restoring beautiful places like Joppa Flats over my shoulder to the nature that they should have. And a lot of that involves eradicating the Phragmites plant, because Phragmites is a problem all across our state, and it's well known to coastal communities. But up until now, there hasn't been a focused, comprehensive effort to try to address it. That's what's so special about this task force, the fact that stakeholders came together and decided that in a comprehensive, coordinated way, we would find solutions to an invasive plant that has been plaguing us for decades. But one of the key elements to this entire project has been understanding exactly how to address all of the problem, so that we address migration, so that we isolate intensive stands, and we make sure that we're able to say to all of our partners that you're part of something meaningful that's going to deliver lasting results, as opposed to one-time fixes. One of the great things about the Great Marsh Revitalization Task Force is that it capitalized on the efforts of volunteers, and two of the most critical people in that category are certainly Peter Phippen and Jeff Walker. For years, these two men have been working in the Great Marsh, trying to understand problems and address issues one at a time. They did a lot of work. They were in the marsh regularly, almost every day at times, understanding what the Phragmites issues were. They were able to give us a great understanding so that when our first meeting kicked off, we started running with good information that Peter and Jeff developed. They've got a lot of help, and they've integrated with a lot of different people. But the one thread of consistency in this task force has been the work of Peter Phippen and Jeff Walker. Beyond that, we've had tremendous participation by folks who are really invested in the process, and you're going to hear from a lot of them along the way. But note carefully that they sound a common theme, whether they are from the Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Department of Environmental Protection, our folks from the Department of Interior and the Wildlife Service. Whomever speaks to you is going to tell you about one thing, the fact that they're invested in a project that's larger than any one agency. And that's not only true of state agencies, it's true of federal agencies, and it's true of local agencies. So listen carefully. As you see the personalities, the individuals, the expertise, they've all got something special to say. We're going to let them say it to you directly, but bear in mind the fact that they are part of a fabric that's been woven together by the common interest of doing the right thing for our great marshes and addressing the Phragmites problem, which all too often is something that folks throw up their hands and say simply can't be confronted. The folks that are going to speak to you actually prove that it can be.
My name is Tim Simmons. I'm a restoration ecologist with the Massachusetts Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, with the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. We're at Pine Island Creek in Newbury, Massachusetts, and the background is the Great Marsh, the largest salt marsh in New England. More people than not that I'm acquainted with have never been out on the marsh. They have no idea that we have this wilderness system in our backyard with all these riches that we've described. And I'd like to change that to the extent possible. But whether or not they ever get out on the marsh, they need to understand that that marsh is preventing the inland areas from catastrophic flooding. And it serves as a buffer in its natural state to storms that would be just devastating to this area if the marsh was not there or if the marsh fails in any way. It's incalculable, the values that it's bringing to our lives, whether you ever see it or not. I tend to think of Phragmites as both a disease and a symptom of disease. It alters the system it invades. Now we see seeds that are almost 100% fertile. And what's happening is this is a wind-pollinated plant, and we've had this stock that's been delivered from all these various different places, and the wind is blowing them together and making this super Phragmites that is more viable, but it's also hardier in a lot of these harsher conditions. So the longer a stand has been there, the tougher it's going to be, and the more genetically diverse it's going to be, and the more viability its seeds will have.
We're down behind Rings Island, next to Ferry Road, and as you can see, this is a very significant stand of Phragmites. If you were to walk straight through these Phragmites, you'd end up in the Atlantic Ocean, probably right where the Merrimack River meets the Atlantic Ocean. You can see the osprey poles beside us. In fact, there's a late nesting osprey you can see on the third pole down. There's nothing growing here. All our native vegetation is definitely just outcompeted. The sun's taken away. It's created its own habitat by all the thatch lying on top of each other and trapping fresh water. I mean, this plant, I'll tell you, when you talk about danger in the reeds, this is a perfect example. What you're looking at right now is the plant I hate the most. This is my enemy. This is what I've dedicated a large part of my life, and Peter Phippen and Greg Moore. I'll tell you what, we have got to be able to stabilize our marsh and fight back the invasives, because the marsh can't do it by itself. When the wind blows that Phragmites, they almost seem pretty. We just walked only 500 or 600 yards into that, and it was so thick. It was hard walking. There was no native vegetation underfoot. It is totally taking away our broad marsh that is so valuable. Our marsh needs help, and our great marsh cannot do it by itself. We need to help the great marsh. This is an invasive, destructive plant.
Okay, Grant, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some natural plant communities here in the marsh, and we're going to first look at a healthy marsh in the high marsh system, and then we'll look at the Phragmites habitat afterwards, and we'll compare how similar and different they are, okay?
Okay.
Let's do it. This looks like a good spot right here to show the diversity of a high marsh system. Let's take a quick peek. Now, look around at all these different patterns on the marsh. How many different species of plants do you see? How many different kinds of plants do you see? And you don't have to know their names.
Well,
Take a guess.
I see 1,
Okay.
2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, that's pretty good. It turns out there's probably as many as 12 or 13 species of grasses and herbs right in here. One of my favorites is right here. Looks like it got broken off.
Yeah.
It's a seaside goldenrod, and it likes to grow in the high marsh. Would you like to hold some? Here you go. Now squeeze that. All right, so all that dead plant material holds water in the marsh. And when the seawater comes up over the marsh, the salty seawater stays trapped in the peat and the roots. Okay? So here's native marsh peat and the native roots. We're going to take a look in a few minutes at Phragmites, and we'll see how far that plant's roots go down. It's very different.
Yep.
Well, this is much deeper down, and you see some big roots. You want to pull that root out of the bottom?
Sure.
It's called a rhizome. It's a little piece we broke off with a shovel. This runs along the ground like this and puts shoots down that way, and it'll put stems up this way. Go ahead and try and break that. Pretty tough stuff, right? Well, yeah. So this little piece of rhizome or root, this little piece can break off and drift to a different part of the marsh and start a whole new plant.
Wow.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Great Marsh. My name is Peter Phippen. I'm a coastal scientist for the Mass Bays National Estuary Program and the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. I'm standing here with my colleague, Robert Buxbaum.
Robert Buxbaum. I'm a conservation scientist with the Massachusetts Audubon Society. The problem with Phragmites is that it pushes everything else out. So ultimately, in many Phragmites areas, you have nothing else but Phragmites there. And the types of birds that use that, particularly some of the rarer species, don't particularly like those Phragmites habitats. And so generally wildlife managers try to manage to prevent Phragmites invasions or to reduce them when they can. And the egrets make use of the pans. During high tide, they'll actually come out and feed on the fish that swim out over to on the marsh surface as the marsh is flooded at high tide. And they also like feeding along the tidal flats in the rivulets and creeks. Absence of invasives in this spot, and we see along the edges, you can see little patches of Phragmites, the common reed, and that's an invasive species which is we're attempting to manage, and I know you're involved in some of those projects more than I am. But from the bird perspective, getting back to the original question you asked, that's a habitat that's considered by most everyone who's looked into it not to be as valuable for birds and other wildlife. So the fact that we have a nice diverse marsh and this
Phragmites free.
Phragmites free is a good thing for pretty much everything.
Mapping Phragmites in the Great Marsh is important for several reasons. First, for understanding the extent of the Phragmites problem within the marsh. How many acres of Phragmites are out there, and how robust is that stand or those stands of Phragmites? Second, it's important for monitoring the effectiveness of the previous year's treatments. We've been treating Phragmites for several years now, and every year we go out and monitor how much of the Phragmites has been killed, how much has regrown, and how robust it is. And third, for providing the contractor with an accurate amount of acreages and locations for calculating his costs for treating Phragmites in the coming year. We also collect ambient surrounding vegetation, and for the purposes of identifying how robust a stand is, we will also measure the height of the tallest stems, the stand density, and the stand maturity, which is measured in whether seed heads are present or absent.
We've been monitoring salinity in Great Marsh for the last 3 years, very intensely in the last 3 years. And the reason primarily is that we know that salinity is among the most important factors that determine the presence of Phragmites or the areas that Phragmites can exploit in the marsh. So when we look at Great Marsh and we start to understand the salinity gradients that exist across the marsh, we're hoping to get a better handle on where Phragmites is going to do best. We look at it both in terms of surface water salinity and salinity at various depths within the soil. The difference between Phragmites' root depth compared to the native species. Phragmites can root a lot deeper, and that means if we're going to monitor salinity in the marsh, we need to look at various depths. EMI allows us to take conductivity measurements, gather tremendous amounts of data very quickly, keep those data in check by having some real-time salinity measurements as well. So I refer to conductivity as apparent conductivity. It's inferred as opposed to the real-time salinity that we collect using the SIPR. So when we combine these two approaches together, we can get an extraordinary amount of data and resolution regarding the salinity patterns on the marsh at any given day and compare them over time and see how those patterns change. This is really what's made EMI such a great tool for guiding management out at the site. The data are collected on the spot on a handheld computer, and we can then take all the data back to the lab and project them in a GIS-based mapping program that allows us to then generate these conductivity maps that look an awful lot like a topographic map. The different lines that are shown are salinity. When we then take our mapped areas of Phragmites and overlay those onto the salinity contour map, we get a really effective tool to make predictions and to prioritize management. All in all, makes the project much more efficient and more effective.
Hi, I'm Kurt Earhart. I'm with Innovative Mosquito Management, the company hired to remove Phragmites here in the Great Marsh in Newburyport, which will be using a very low ground pressure machine known as a Marsh Master. It exudes 1 pound per square inch over the marsh, much lighter than any human footprint can put down. We'll be using a combination of herbicides to control the Phragmites. The herbicides we use, salt of imazapyr, is essentially a salt acid that's introduced to the plant. And this introduction blocks an enzyme specific to the plant and plants only that is used to make an amino acid that the plant needs to make food. The timing of this particular application is critical, has to be late season, because the plants, like all plants and animals, spend their time trying to reproduce. Phragmites spends the entire summer season growing to make enough energy for the seed heads which form. And once the seed heads are formed, the plant then spends all of its time and energy moving starches and sugars back to the root system so it can overwinter. It's at this point where we like to introduce the herbicide, because the translocation, or the movement of the material from the top of the plants to the roots, is at most advantageous.
Hi, I'm Emily Sullivan. I'm the Wetlands Project Coordinator for the Northeast Mass Mosquito Control and Wetlands Management District. We're here today on the Great Marsh at one of our mowing sites. Today we're mowing the area after it's been treated with the herbicide. Our equipment is highly specialized. It's been custom fabricated to be low ground pressure. On average, they're about 3 pounds per square inch. The obvious benefits to having a low ground pressure machine is that you can get into wet areas, soft areas, particularly the marsh areas where Phragmites grows, and you can cause very minimal impact, if any at all.
Hi, my name is Tim. I'm employed by the Northeast Mass Mosquito Control and Wetlands Management District. We're here on the Great Marsh on this beautiful sunny day. I'm sitting in a Casbauer 270 piston bully, 270 meaning 270 horsepower Mercedes diesel engine. And we're here in the marsh today removing Phragmites, an invasive species, by the use of this machine, which has on the front of it a rhino flail mower, which runs at about 1,700 RPMs, and a spinning drum with hanging chain teeth that are like this.
It's very effective in reducing the height of the Phragmites and exposing the ground below to air and sunlight, which then allows the native plants and seeds to rejuvenate up through and grow. So it's an essential part of any herbicide treatment program, is to follow it up with typically 1 to 2 years of consistent mowing. In some cases, we're called in to mow as a fire suppression. Late in the season, Phragmites gets very dry and brittle. Even a small spark or, say, a cigarette thrown out a window could ignite the entire stand, and it goes very quickly.
Transect 1 is located upstream from the culvert that was reconstructed in 2004. Before restoration, there was an average of about 9 meters of Phragmites. Today we have about 4, 2 of which contain immature Phragmites. The Phragmites found in the latter half of the transect, in meters 20 through 30, have been completely eliminated after the installation of the new culvert.
Say Town Farm Road is right here. There is a little creek that runs underneath the road. Okay. And the creek is the fresh water coming into the estuary, so it's coming this way from a freshwater river, and it's headed out to the ocean. What the people who started this program did 17 years ago is they put one set of wells on the ocean side as a control. And so they called this part Transect 0 over here, and we have Transect 3. We have Transect 1, and we have Transect 2. Transects 1, 2, and 3 are affected by the culvert that goes underneath the road. Right? So there's human impact to Transects 1, 2, and 3. No human impact to Transect 0. That's why it's our control group.
32 is the shallow. Medium was 30 and deep 25, right? Okay. And this is the zone where we think Phragmites has a hard time growing. It can really dominate if it's like less than 18. So doing pretty well here.
21 meters of this 30-meter transect were either bare or completely submerged with no plant life at all. This ponding could be due to runoff from the road, which is close by, or it could be due in part to changes in sea level. The salinity here ranges from 20 to 35 parts per thousand, with an average of 28.8. So it is actually higher than the reference transect.
Hello, I'm Dr. Greg Moore, a research professor at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm here with Frank Drzeski.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Frank Drzeski, and I am the Deputy Refuge Manager of this beautiful place. This is Parker River National Wildlife Refuge. The salt marsh is being threatened right now, and it's being threatened by a number of invasive plants. Phragmites is probably our number one enemies that have come into the salt marsh, things that we're trying to control.
I actually find them running into fishermen out here. What are they going after? What's the big sell here?
This is a real popular spot for surf fishing, and they're going after, number one species is the striped bass. And the salt marsh acts as a nursery for striped bass, for a lot of fin fish, in fact. And that's another thing that is one of the most important things salt marsh serves is as a nursery for fin fish and shellfish. So we talked about the fishermen. We also have shell fishermen out here that dig clams, which is an important activity for the clammers and for folks that like to eat clams. And these are sustainable activities as long as we provide a healthy environment, a healthy habitat. This is such an important area for a number of reasons that we've already talked about. That this area is certainly worth protecting. Number one, it's a national wildlife refuge, and we're gonna protect it, and we're gonna do everything we can, but we can't do it alone. We're gonna need help from the community, and hopefully we'll come to that long-term solution someday. I think we have a really good working model here, and it all stems from the partnerships and the ability to work with other groups and agencies and non-government organizations. I think that's key. That's the key. If anyone wants to take away from this, that's the message, is to work with your partners and work with others. There's a lot of people out there that care.
Thanks so much, Frank, for taking the time, and thanks to you for watching Danger in the Reeds.
I'd like to also thank you folks. It's all of us together, working together to try to control these invasive plants and to protect this wonderful habitat. Thank you very much.
If I was successful in that film, people should be brimming with questions. Do you have any questions at this point? I failed. Oh, there we go.
How's Conscom feel about us going in there and chopping down Phragmites?
Come to Conscom and ask us if you have a plan that meets state law and so on. Most of the conservation commissions would probably be open to that. We have, in fact, issued some orders of conditions for Phragmites control in places such as around Great Neck. So,
is there someplace online where we can do this?
I don't know. I think that the conservation agent in this, all of the surrounding communities, certainly help you with the appropriate forms, and they probably show you orders of conditions that have been provided to others who are doing it.
Carl, you want to come up here and say that into here? The question is, if I got you right, what can people do themselves to Phragmites that might be on your own property? Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And maybe Peter would like to come up here as well.
From a regulatory perspective or a Wetlands Act perspective or a local bylaw perspective, there's no blanket prohibition on invasive species control. The process in all of the communities is to submit a notice of intent to do so, which describes in some detail what you wish to do. There clearly are, as were some of the people involved in this film, professionals out there that are licensed to carry these things out and can provide the applicant with a great deal of technical help in what is appropriate. You may want to have a conversation with the conservation agent of your community, who can probably provide you with, at a minimum, orders of conditions of similar projects that have been previously approved, which would be a great place to start, okay? My guess is that if you have a clear plan, if you have licensed professionals, if licenses are required, you must have them for the professionals doing the work and so on. And I think that you will probably be encouraged to move ahead by most conservation commissions.
Well, it sounds as though when you're talking about the project that we have to have an outline of what we're going to do, but that to me is more like what's going on
probably 90 by, down to the water line. 90 feet.
The Ipswich Conservation Commission very recently, on the basis of a request for determination, which is in effect a short form approach, approved an eradication attempt on very small acreage, and the basis of that proposal was, I think, a 4-page plan prepared by individuals. The commission waived the requirement for engineering plans. The commission, I don't know that the commission I don't recall whether or not the commission waived the requirements for delineation of the wetlands, but I think in the matter that we did, it had been done by somebody else previously. So you probably need to have someone define where the wetlands are and get the commission's agreement that that is true, and then you can probably, on small acreage, or, you know, can probably find a professional who can take off the shelf a plan for doing this that has been previously approved. Okay?
And each community, the Conservation Commission, is going to be a little bit different in what they require you to do. As Carl mentioned, you know, whether you need a delineation or not, you know, so on and so forth. I know in Ipswich a few years ago, the Clark Pond Homeowners Association group did some spraying on that property, you know, around the whole pond. You know, so there's some precedent, and I would just go to each individual agent, you know, Concom agent, and find out what they require for you to do. As you noted, in this particular instance, we get blanket permission from the Conservation Commission, and then we seek property permission from the property owners to be able to treat on their property. So it's fairly simple when you're doing something of this magnitude, but as an individual, you really have to go in and talk to the agent and find out exactly what they want you to do and how they want you to do it.
Now, is this particular plant like this, does this favor fresh water?
What's that?
Does it favor fresh water over salt water?
What it favors is sort of impaired water, and it prefers fresh, but it can grow in salt water or saltish water or on the side of the road with road runoff, any sort of contamination in it. And what it does is, because it can deal with that condition, it outcompetes the other plants that can't handle that impairment. So yeah, it's very good at adapting to you know, sort of an impaired water.
Yeah, they have storm drains, right, that dump into the marsh.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and you'll see a lot of Phragmites there. You know, full salinity is hard for the Phragmites to grow. You saw in that discussion on the electromagnetic inductance, the white areas that he showed on the map are high salinity, and the Phragmites can grow in there, but it's really stressed, and it's probably not going to spread too much. Whereas some of the other areas where the salinities are in the 18 to 25 parts per thousand, the Phragmites can outcompete the regular marsh plants and do fairly well there.
thank you.
Actually, Clark's Pond and Joppa Flats on Water Street is another precedent. It's just the community you come from probably has certain biases. I mean, I've been on the planning board in Concom, and I'm now a selectman in Newbury. Newbury, because of the amount of Phragmites we have, and we've been very familiar with processing abilities to get rid of them, you know, works pretty closely with people. But, you know, the size of the scope of this program, we're so close to it, we forget. We went through endangered species, it's habitat for sturgeons. I mean, we really went through, I mean, so we have a lot of executive privilege from the Wildlife Refuge. So you probably really should, I mean, it's good intentions. No one's going to make you feel bad when you go to your Concom agent and ask them for advice, and that's my suggestion.
Yeah, we're just this year moving into Salisbury to do widespread treatments up in there, so we're going through the whole process all over again with the Conservation Commission in Salisbury, where we're getting, we're seeking blanket permission, and we're identifying all the property owners. There's
a couple hundred of them throughout the marsh, you know, owners unknown and all this kind of stuff, to try to figure out exactly who owns the properties that the Phragmites is on and seek their permission to be able to treat. You know, it's a logistical nightmare, but, you know, it's what you really have to do it right.
Yeah.
Two comments. From a filmmaker's point of view, I think it would be really effective to show a before and after success story. Does this really work? The other question I have, since I have all these experts at hand, we have a small amount of Phragmites. We'd like to eradicate it, but our neighbor doesn't seem very interested in spending the money to do it.
Well, let me repeat for the audience what you just asked. Yes, it would be nice to have before and after, and we had 1 year to do this, and it took us a whole year. So there are places, let me just say this, where we saw Frank and Greg being interviewed, or interviewing each other, there was a stand of Phragmites that was out by parking lot 2, wasn't it? Yeah. And they sprayed that. And you saw that being sprayed by the sprayer, right? That was the same stand. And we went back out, and I was determined to go out there every week and video that as it died. And the government shut down. And it was closed gate. And Peter took me out in his boat. And then we were being followed. And clandestinely, we got our footage.
But it'll be interesting to go back and film again.
It's gone. They mowed it. It's gone. We've driven by it. It's like, where the hell did we shoot that?
It will come back. Some amount of it will probably come back, and we'll treat it again this year. But yeah, I mean, that's what we've been doing, is you don't just treat it once and it's gone. It comes, you know, a little bit of it will come back, and then you treat that. And usually, depending on how stressed the stand is, how far out into the marsh it is, how much salinity it's growing in, you can get rid of it within 3 treatments.
Yeah, standard protocol that we try to adhere to is 3 years of treatment with at least 1 or 2 mowings in between. The mowings, because it's easier to treat new growth the next year, and it also reduces the thatch, which creates elevation, which traps fresh water, which is rainwater.
It also exposes a seed, the native plant seeds, so they grow back up through, so they're challenging the Phragmites.
And before we get one more question, I do have to thank Rick Hydron and his wife Sharon, because Peter and I are extremely easy to work with, and the conditions out there were just, I mean, you couldn't have asked for easier working conditions than being with expensive cameras in the water and marsh, and everything went absolutely just as it was planned.
Every time.
I forgot to wear my boots. One second, please. You had a second part to your question, and I've forgotten what it is already.
Is there any point in taking out half a stand if our neighbors are not interested in taking it?
Ah, yes, the neighbors issue. You want to take that one, Carl? Go for it, buddy. And repeat the question for us.
The question was, you know, if you're living, if you're sharing a coastline and you have neighbors and you want to go through the expense of eliminating the frag in front of your property, on the ocean side of your property, and the neighbors have no interest in doing so, then what's the point? And I think my own personal answer to that comes from my experiences as a Peace Corps volunteer demonstrating new strains of rice. And the question that my villagers in Nepal had was, well, what's the point? And the answer is, go ahead and do it, because your neighbors are then going to see that you have had a level of success. And that may, or maybe not, will bring them along. But I think that's the best answer I can give. These programs do work relatively well if you're persistent with them. And if you suddenly are the only ones that can still see the ocean from your property and your neighbors can't, their attitude may well change.
Are you titled? Yes, you're still titled.
Oh, so you're right down here then.
On the Ipswich River.
Yes.
Still titled.
Okay.
And I guess it's not a neighbor management question, it's more of a technical question of, isn't it just going to...
Yeah, I mean, you'll knock it back, and, you know, but it's going to continue to grow because it's got rhizomes and seed source and all that right there. So you're going to have to be diligent on treatments. But as Carl mentioned, maybe your neighbor will see, oh, wow, it's opened up. Maybe I should try doing this, and it's not that big a deal. It's not that expensive, whatever it may be. So, you know, it's certainly going to help your situation. If he were to get rid of his stand, then you could potentially get rid of it fairly quickly. Whereas if his half is going to stay there, then it's going to be there for a while.
Is it a robust, dense stand with a lot of height, or is it a more minimal stand?
Unfortunately, his is.
Yeah.
And it's now starting to encroach on ours. I think that ours is probably not firmly entrenched and could be dealt with, but it seems like it's just going to spread from.
You know what, it's pretty surprising though, if you can do it and have some maintenance, if you have if Concom allows you to mow and do a few other things there, you'll be surprised. You can maintain some level.
Okay, I think you're next, please.
Yeah, do you have a sense of the whole while you're doing this by percentage or by land or by any form? What's out there for Phragmites?
Okay, so the question, these guys are going to start laughing. The question is there a measurement of the scope of the problem within the Great Marsh area itself? As the video showed, this guy tromping around out there with his handheld GPS physically measures them. He walks around them to the extent that he can, and then draws some interpolation where he would be too underwater to complete the circle. But
Every frag stand, ambient vegetation, height and density, from Hampton Harbor to Winnesheek. What did it take, 3 years?
Yeah,
More or less. So.
But
It'd be interesting, you know, even on a video, say, at least by best guess.
yeah, I mean, percentage-wise, it's not very high. What we've been focusing on, you know, for this video and our first efforts is the Phragmites stands that are growing out in the open marsh and the marsh platform, not on the upland edge, but the ones that are out in the open marsh, which is very unusual, and it shouldn't be there at all. So we want to get rid of that completely, because that's an indicator of something going on that's not right in that particular part of the marsh. All along the upland edge of the Great Marsh, you know, not every linear foot, but pockets here and there, you're finding Phragmites, but it's fairly well contained. It's where the fresh water comes in to the salt water, that brackish area, you're going to get some Phragmites in there. It's not generally going to spread out into the marsh too far, so it's fairly stable. Out in the middle of the marsh, when you see a stand, it can potentially spread around, and so that's why we've been going after those ones. Mainly Salisbury, lower Salisbury Marsh is pretty well infested. Newbury, below the Plum Island Turnpike, was pretty bad down to about Pine Island Creek. We've taken care of a lot of that. And then there are pockets up the Parker and Mill Rivers in Newbury where there's some, not terrible. And then there's a couple of pockets down here in Ipswich in Labor and Vane Creek and a few other places around. There's nothing in the open marsh in Essex or Gloucester, which is nice. So it's not as bad as it seems, but, you know, it's still, you know, it's several hundreds of acres of Phragmites in the open marsh, and probably, you know, bordering on 1,000 acres in the upland edge, and we're talking about I don't know, 20,000 acres Great Marsh. So it's pretty small.
So the idea, if you do nothing, it will grow. It will start to.
It'll start to spread, definitely. It'll expand out. And, you know, as part of this project, we're also looking at what the underlying conditions are that are causing the Phragmites to be able to grow in the open marsh. So we've been doing a lot of research. We're seeking grants, funding from any source that we can to try to determine what are some of the reasons why the Phragmites is here? Is it a tidal restriction? Is it, too much freshwater runoff from stormwater? What's going on here? What do we need to do? And how can we change those conditions so that once we get rid of the Phragmites, it isn't going to just come right back? So it's a very long, complicated, and fairly expensive process to work on this. Yeah, as a matter of fact, we should hear within the next week. We applied for a Hurricane Sandy resiliency grant funds for about $3.2 million to do a lot of work in the Great Marsh to bolster its capacity to protect the upland areas from sea level rise and hurricane, storm surge, and such. And some significant components of that are removal of invasives, including Phragmites and perennial pepperweed, which is a fairly new invader to the marsh. It's just now starting to get a foothold. We have a whole nother program to deal with that, to get rid of those plants and let the native plants come back, and they provide much better buffer against sea level rise and storm surge than the invasives, as well as trying to restore native eelgrass, which left the Great Marsh probably 75, 80 years ago. We're trying to reestablish that. It's a subtidal grass that also helps to bolster the marsh's capacity to protect the upland from storm surge. And as part of that Sandy grant, we're also looking at developing a hydrodynamic model of the entire Great Marsh hydrology to try to determine where the salinities are coming from, where the fresh water is coming from, why is it low here, high there, what's going on, so that we can try to pinpoint why the Phragmites is growing where it's growing, and also at the same time be able to model different scenarios. If we open the Plum Island Bridge up a little wider, are we letting more salt water in, and is that flushing the marsh with salt water? Now the Phragmites can't grow there. Different options like that is what we're planning on looking at.
You know Nichols Field in Ipswich? Okay. For 5 years, I've been pulling pepperweed, and I was assigned 120 yards of shoreline to work on the pepperweed project. The first year that I was out there, I pulled out 16 trash bags. The second year were 10 trash bags. This year, 1 trash bag was pulled out. There is no pepperweed there today because I checked, and all of that area is covered with Phragmites now, and it wasn't when we started.
So one Phragmites, one invasive to another,
Yeah, exactly.
That's a fear. That's a fear, yeah.
You had a question.
Well, it might have already been answered. I think it's tough for, individual owners, because I know I have a 1/4 acre roughly that's Phragmites, and it backs up to what we now know is a stream. We didn't know.
You couldn't see the stream for the Phragmites?
Pardon?
You couldn't see the stream for the Phragmites?
Oh, you don't want the whole story, but basically, there was a 1/2 acre, 1/4 acre before that I cleared, and I didn't know I wasn't supposed to, because it was being strangled by, bittersweet and poison ivy, and we couldn't even see or get through there. But bottom line, with every invasive except for knotweed. But I'd love to do what you're talking about. But we're not supposed to touch it. And what you're talking about could be rather expensive, prohibitive. And with neighbors next door who aren't doing that, because if you already have trees in the swamp area, I don't know if it's marsh, I'm not sure how to proceed, really.
Well, I'll let these gentlemen take it, but let me try and paraphrase your question. With approximately 1/2 acre of your property covered with a variety of vegetation that is undesirable, what sort of approach is acceptable for dealing with it?
The two conservation.
Yeah, I think that we all live here together, and a Conservation Commission, the Ipswich Conservation Commission is going to get extremely upset if a shorefront property goes out there and mows down everything, just clears the field out in order to do their view screen, and there's good reason for that, okay?
And I agree.
On the other hand, we're also all aware, as I just told you, Nichols Field, that's conservation property, and we've replaced pepperweed with Phragmites. We are concerned about this problem. We realize that people coming to us with small lots, doing small projects, are up against it. It's as simple as that. The level of success you're going to get is not as good yet as it should be, but we're willing to talk to you about it. If you have a clear plan, we're probably going to waive engineering plans and so on, because it's a problem, and we get it, okay? We do, and come see us about it. If you happen to have 5-inch trees on that, we're probably not going to give you permission to cut them down, but you can probably run a mower around them and see if that helps them, because my guess is they're getting killed by the bittersweet anyway.
Is what started me.
Is there a plan for Nichols? Is there a plan for dealing with Phragmites?
Well, I think what it
Well, let me get the question in for the audience. Hopefully people are watching. Is there a plan for dealing with the Phragmites in Nichols Field? Is that the question?
No, because the town doesn't have the money at this point for eradication. Oh, I can't even begin to guess. I think these gentlemen, what big
It
projects.
wouldn't be that expensive, though.
Is it per acre?
Yeah, it's about $600 per acre. So, I don't know how big it is, so it can't be that big.
No.
Yeah.
But they're.
So a few $100 each year for a couple of years. Yeah.
Whatever it's worth, we're right across from Nichols Field, and we never had Phragmites until probably maybe,
They pulled the pepperweed.
stuff across the river from us.
Yeah. No, the Pepperweed project was entirely volunteer. Was a volunteer project, so.
Yeah.
I don't know that the town of Ipswich is involved in any invasive control projects other than mowing of roadside mowing, which may or may not be effective against Japanese knotweed. We don't really know.
Let me ask you a question. We've talked about pepperweed and Phragmites. We understand the difference in terms of pepperweed is something that they can pull out, but Phragmites has roots that go down very deep, and it's not something you can deal with that way at all. I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that. There's huge differences here. Are there other questions? Because I have a couple of questions for you people.
This has been kind of illuminating for Peter and I. We're basically staff for what's called the Great Marsh Revitalization Task Force. It's chaired by Bruce Tarr and some of our other senators and local reps. And the question that homeowners have, really articulated tonight, I never really stopped to think about it. And some of the, issues that you have trying to move forward with smaller projects. And I just spoke with Peter, and that's why Kyle turned around, wondering what we were talking about. And we'll look into it. I mean, certainly it's under town control, but also everything has a tendency to be discussed at larger levels and then maybe brought to the community. So we'll start to try to think about that on a different scale.
There was a website where homeowners could go and get information.
Yeah, the state has been slow to respond to sort of streamlining the permitting on invasives. New Hampshire has done a better job where you don't have to jump through as many hoops to try to deal with an invasive species. You're actually trying to get rid of it. The state of Massachusetts is looking into that, and I don't know where they stand now on that process, but maybe you could look on the state website and see if there is anything on invasive species control there.
What I'm passing out now is a QR coded sign this is a prototype of what we hope to have up around the marsh in a few weeks' time. Part of the original Kickstarter project, and my wife in the back there, I have to give her credit because she's the one who suggested it to me a year and a half ago, was to put up some QR-coded signs in appropriate places around the marsh where people could use their phone, bring up a video about what it is that they see, Phragmites or whatever. And certainly wasn't money in the original project for that, and Essex National Heritage, whose name is at the top of that, did give us a small grant to help us defray part of the cost of that. And in that process, we have developed actually some more interviews about the Great Marsh, not necessarily, well, not at all about Phragmites, but other issues. If you turn it over, there's a list of all the stuff that we have completed at the top, and then at the bottom under progress, in progress, right? And hopefully we'll have at least one or two of each of those speakers available online on YouTube, and then we can point these signs at them and get these signs up by the end of the month. It's kind of a daunting task, but we've got really good momentum going so far. The people that we've talked to, have interviewed, have been terrific. So my point here is that's really all we have for a program besides doing what we're doing right now, standing up here and answering questions and showing the video. We hope to have the overview in the hands of the community television around the Great Marsh, all the communities. I don't know how many people watch community television in their communities, but it's something. It's what we call guerrilla marketing, okay? And you are my first guerrillas. Okay? I need your help to get the word out. I need you to go find it, Danger in the Reeds online, and post it on your Facebook and your LinkedIn, and tell all your neighbors and over a cup of coffee and whatnot. Word of mouth. If you have other organizations that would be open to hosting us coming in and doing what we've done tonight, please contact me. I'd love to do it. There's a variety of things that people can help do that I haven't even thought of. If you have an idea, contact us. Let us hear what you have to say. I'm sure we'll figure out a way to do it. I'm not, it's out there for free to watch, okay? But in a flat world that's getting flatter by the moment, it's harder and harder to find stuff where everybody is publishing stuff, okay? So it's you people helping us, and I hope you'll do that. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Rick. I want to thank Carl, Peter, and Jeff for coming in tonight. Just want to reiterate, all of you are welcome to go to the Conservation Commission office. The agent is there, free of charge for your assistance. Speak to her. The other thing is you can go on to your website for the University of Massachusetts Extension Services. They have a phenomenal website that deals with all sorts of invasives, not only Phragmites, but oriental bittersweet and anything else that you might find on your property. It's a free service, and they also have booklets that they will be happy to send you. Yes. Say it again, please. University of Massachusetts Extension Services for anything environmental. This is an ongoing service that we're providing here. This program here is today sponsored by your Conservation Commission, and the reason we have this specific program here is because at least 25% of the people that come before us are dealing with invasives, including Phragmites. We also have published a video which you can see on your computers, or you can get a hard copy if you go to ICAM, and it will be dealing with five other invasives, including how to get rid of bittersweet and so on. So please take advantage of that. This is information that you can also get if you go to see our conservation agent, because we're always looking for programs that are informative to you, the citizens of Ipswich, concerning the environment that you live with and also the problems that we sometimes find on it. We're open to other people coming in talking about subjects that might be helpful. The next person that we have coming that I know of for a fact, we've booked Russ Cohen, and he is coming here on October 8th, Wednesday at 7 o'clock. He's going to be talking about one of the benefits of living on the North Shore, and it will be the edible greens and mushrooms that we can find throughout our area. But if you have information, if you have a subject that you would like to hear about and you know someone that can present it, please come to the Conservation Commission. We would like to hear from you. So again, I want to thank you all for coming tonight.